All right, I think we're recording now. Hello and welcome, everybody. Liz, welcome back. Looks like you dropped off there for a second. This is James Orr. Tonight we're going over how to get down payment for Nomad. And there's the web address, I guess, for that. I'm joined tonight by Jason Bowman. Jason, are you there?
I am.
Amazing. He's back from the dead. Apparently had the flu over the weekend, and we weren't sure if he was going to make it on tonight. So I'm glad that he is on, and I have my Nuke Power shirt. We were just talking about go Navy Nuclear Power.
Nuke Power!
Do you still know the secret handshake?
Oh, good grief.
You don't know the secret handshake? Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Okay. So introductions. Who are you and where are you from? So if you want to participate, we got some people on tonight. Feel free to use the webinar chat. Donna says, who is Jason talking to?
I don't think other people can see other people's messages in the chat thing.
Oh, because she's Andrew's only chatting to all panelists, not to everybody.
Oh,
you can
okay.
choose whether you want to go to everybody or just the panelists. So you guys can use the chat window. Go ahead and let us know who you are and where you're calling in from for the webinar. And then what is your biggest down payment concern with Nomad? So by now you should hopefully know a little bit about what the Nomad model is and how it works. So what's your concern with down payment? And we will continue on and talk about this. So Jason, what is your biggest concern with Nomad down payment?
What down payment?
All right, so you did VA loan. So you've handled down payment for the first couple. What is your concern with down payment moving forward?
Actually, it's probably in line with what we're talking about tonight. I mean, you know that I'm saving very, very aggressively for a 20% down payment, whether I use it this year or not. Yeah. I'm still choosing to save for it.
Right.
And I'll tell you, it gets tight. Like I got to make that transfer tomorrow from checking to savings, and it's going to be half the money I've got in checking.
And that's how you do it? You transfer your money from checking to savings?
Yeah, the first of every month, I've got a, I guess I'll talk. I've got a $4,500 a month target that I'm trying to hit, and it gets tight sometimes.
That's your savings amount?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean it's not like I'm sitting here making $500,000 a year, right? And
so pretty aggressive savings plan.
What's that?
I said that's a pretty aggressive savings.
Yeah, it's hard. But even if I was making $40,000 a year and was trying to save, $1,500 a month, it would still be tight. Just how it scales.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you, Donna. Welcome. Donna's from Fort Collins. She has no concerns. So
okay,
that's super easy. Everyone else has opted not to participate in tonight's presentation. They decided, I think I'm just going to be a little bit of a voyeur tonight and hang out and not really participate in the chat window at all. But that's cool. People can do that.
This is not the voyeur dorm.
They're Bobby Brown it tonight. That's their prerogative to not participate. So welcome all those that have chosen not to participate in the chat window. All right, upcoming classes. So how to get down payment for Nomad. Apparently that's tonight. I don't know why I have that on there. I probably should have removed it. So that was my mistake.
Well, when did you finish putting together this presentation?
I'm embarrassed to say that I was doing it like 15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So, but I've given the presentation before and it's good. Yeah. So I can tell you that.
It's good stuff.
So how to get down payment for Nomad, that is what tonight's presentation is about. Next week is looking at houses. That's what we do. Oh, Elijah has opted in. He said, I am from Fort Collins, making the lowest down payment possible. Well, Elijah, good news for you. I'm going to show you how to do it with nothing down tonight. So
without telling him to go spend 6 years on a boat?
Yes, I'll do that without having to join the military. Elijah, you didn't join the military, did you? You're out of college, right? Engineering guy? I think he's an engineering guy. He'll let us know. Nope. Okay. But no. Architecture. There we go. Sorry about
Perfect.
that.
Even better.
They're close cousins, architecture and engineering. All right. So looking at houses, that's March 7th. And that's basically what you do when you're out in the fields, in a house, looking at stuff. We're going to go over kind of what I think is important about doing that for Nomad. Making strong offers that get accepted. In our market, here in Northern Colorado, it's an extremely strong seller's market. It's probably the strongest we've ever seen. And so making strong offers is really important. In other markets may not be as important. So that's probably one of those classes that is going to be more appropriate in certain regions, certain geographical markets than others. Although your market may transition and may become more important for you to have that information. So that's probably one of those classes that I might not teach every year. Might be one of those classes I teach, once, and then we kind of fill it in with some additional content in future years. Same thing with lowball offer case studies. There's definitely some people that believe, I should be coming in and making these very low offers. Properties listed for 300,000, I should come in and offer 250. And I'm going to show you actual data from our local MLS about, how many of those offers get accepted. And I might even pull out some properties. That's the intention behind the word case studies there. The words case studies is I will go ahead and pull properties out and show you, what properties are getting lowballed and getting accepted, and if there's any characteristics we can see with those properties and how they might work. So I'm going to show you some really interesting charts and data on that. But the Nomad way, you do not have to lowball. You can buy properties for full retail and make this model work. It's one of the most forgiving kind of models you can do. You don't have to go and pick the property that is distressed in order to buy it and buy in the wrong neighborhood. You're living in these properties for a year, so it is okay to buy in nicer neighborhoods. It's okay to buy in neighborhoods that have high demand. In fact, I would actually encourage you to do that, pay a little bit of a premium for property in order to get a nicer property than to get something that's a little bit crappier just because you can get a deal on it. That is not the Nomad way. So we're going to talk about that in lowball offer case studies. And that's another one of those classes that I may not teach it every year, maybe like a one-off type of class. There's definitely some core ones that we teach every year. At least that's how I'm envisioning this right now. But there's definitely going to be some that are sort of like, I only need to do this once, and then we will kind of put it in the archive. People will be able to go watch them. But the other standard ones, like all the different Nomad strategies, Young Nomad, Catch Up Nomad, there's going to be a new version of that each year because I think there's updated stuff to talk about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you made a good point. I'm going to have a very, very different perspective, just geographically, than you on the making strong offers and the lowball case studies, just because of my market.
Yeah, and some of the stuff that I'm going to teach you, like a seller's property disclosure class, that one's not going to be exactly appropriate for you because you're going to have a different seller's property disclosure just process, and your contract is written different than ours here in Northern Colorado. And so you'll have a different one. And so I'll go ahead and teach you kind of the thought process, and you can kind of adapt those. That's really what that Thursday is about, right? Tuesday night, we have the webinar, and everyone gets on, and we kind of teach the class. But then you got to take the information we do on Tuesday night, almost like a book club where we read the book together. And then on Thursday, you get together and you discuss that strategy with local people, local real estate agents and lenders and title people and those types of folks, where you can adapt what we taught on Tuesday to the Thursday night. All right, Jason, this is your time. It's your time to shine. This is your slide each week. So what is Nomad?
Nomad is, I like to look at it as you build a real estate investment portfolio by doing something that you already do. You buy a house, you move in, you pay your mortgage, and then once a year, you just do it again.
Okay, why are you doing it once a year? Why don't you just go buy 12 over the course of the first year? Why don't you just buy 12 at a time?
Well, under current rules, you must live in the property for 12 months as a condition of your mortgage contract in order to qualify for owner-occupant financing.
Why is that important? Why do we care that it's owner-occupant?
Because you get lower interest rates, you can do some no money down programs. I can't use a VA loan to buy a pure investment property. They require that I live in it for 12 months.
Right. It's
just a requirement of the program. And so if you're using any of these VA, USDA, FHA, or the low down payment Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac programs, you don't have a choice.
Hello.
Sorry about that.
There you go. Usually we don't need to do reminders because we're not in a live classroom environment where we have people in the audience whose cell phone goes off.
And also, I usually have it on Do Not Disturb because I never, ever answer my phone. Just today, I needed to take the call from the loan officer. So
there you go.
Sorry about that.
I went to a continuing education class last week, and the instructor had just told us a story about getting their new iPhone. And during class, there was a ringing coming from the front of the room, and the instructor is looking around like, who's got the nerve to let their phone ring, and then like let it ring for like 6 or 7 times where it doesn't shut off and it's really loud. And he's like looking around, and I'm like, hey Doug, I think that's your new phone. And he goes like really embarrassed. He looks at his phone. He's like, oh my gosh, I don't even know my own ringtone. I did so embarrassed. It was him. It was the instructor that had forgotten to turn their phone off and was like giving everyone the stink eye, looking around for like who had the nerve to have their phone go off during a class. So,
my bad.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that was you. So, all right, cool. So we covered what Nomad is. How to get the down payment for Nomad. So, one of the things we talk about with Nomad is this idea that we can invest in rental properties, acquire a very large portfolio of rental properties, whatever size you want, whether that's one rental property or 15 or 20 or whatever your number is. We talk a lot of times about acquiring this portfolio of rental property using little down payment, because one of the benefits of being able to do Nomad is you get owner-occupant financing where you have to move into the property, but we can do that with nothing down if we're doing USDA or VA. You can do it with very low down payment if you're doing FHA, especially with down payment assistance, or conventional financing. 1% down there's a conventional loan for the first property, 3% down for the first 2 or 3, and then 5% down for each additional property that you buy. But 5% up to the 10 property limit is what we usually talk about. So you can acquire large number of rental properties with very little down. But tonight we're going to talk about, so how do you actually come up with that down payment? If you've got all the money set aside in the bank account, super easy. You can just go use that. But we're going to talk about some strategies and ideas for coming up with a down payment for Nomad. So if you don't have the $15,000 for a 5% down on a $300,000 property, which is about what we need here in our local market, then you'll be able to go ahead and raise that money and ideas to come up with that money and how we do it. And you have a really interesting story kind of perspective on this that we're going to talk about pretty late in the presentation, but it's actually pretty insightful, I thought, when I read your article about it. Was that a couple years ago, a year ago now? What was that?
Yeah, it's 2 years ago.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting article, and I'm kind of interested to see you present on it, because I've referenced that article. Even Tammy mentioned I referenced that article sometimes in class, but now we've got the author of the article, and they can kind of talk about it. So
yeah, I didn't know you guys did that. I appreciate that.
It was a good article, right? I mean, you really did some research on that and broke down some math, so I think.
Yeah, but I kind of wrote it it was in response to a political situation at the time, and so I wrote it in kind of a hissy fit, I think.
Well, some of the best content comes from that place of, somebody says something and you don't feel it's correct, or you feel like you have a very different opinion, and you have a strong emotional reaction to it. And in this case, I think that your reaction was at least appropriate for some people. Maybe not for everybody. I mean, sure. I'm definitely not doing it.
No.
But
and I'm not doing it anymore either.
There you go.
Even though I was at the time, sort of.
All right. So we'll talk about that later. We're going to get to kind of hinting at what's coming along. So some additional resources. So I'm going to go over like kind of a very small portion of the presentation tonight, but it kind of overlaps into a lot of different areas. It kind of overfills into the Little Down Nomad overview, which is the strategy. Little Down Nomad, by the way, is the real estate investors who watch late night TV and they kind of want to get involved in investing in real estate. Little Down Nomad is a way for people to acquire rental property with little down. And we kind of focus on teaching that subgroup of nomads in that presentation. If you're a premium Nomad member, you can go watch this video after the fact. We have a live version of it coming up. I have no idea when it is. I didn't put dates on here, but all these other ones, they're coming up live as well. The book excluded, but there's live versions of these classes coming up. In addition, if you're a premium Nomad member, you can go ahead and watch the recording I did from last year. So the live recording from the presentation I did the previous year. So Little Down Nomad, that's kind of touches on this. It talks a lot about investing in real estate with little or nothing down. Nomad with lease option exit overview. One of the strategies in order to come up with down payment for Nomad is to use the lease option. And I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail later when I explain that, but a lease option, for those that don't know, it's the ability to lease the property and then have an option to buy it. And so we find what we call a tenant buyer, a tenant who's going to be buying the property from us down the road. And we give them the right to lease the property for, let's say, a year or 2 or 3 or 4. And then they have the right to buy the property. They have an option in order to buy the property a year or 2 or 3 down the road for a fixed price. And we use the upfront option fee they give us as the down payment for the next house that we're going to buy. And so if you imagine for a minute, someone who wants to come in and they want to buy the property from you and they've got 5% down, they give you a 5% down option fee. And then you could use that option fee for your 5% down payment on the house that you're going to purchase. And then they would lease the property from you, and they have the option to buy it from you at some point in the future. So we'll talk a lot about that a little bit later. It's going to be a big part of the presentation toward the end. So there's a whole class on that right there, lease option exit overview on learnaburish.com. And then financing Nomad 101. We taught this class earlier this year, Jason, right? You came on and we taught financing Nomad 101.
Correct. And I just want to say, if people are watching this recording later on and they haven't watched the Financing Nomad 101, I think it's, in my personal opinion, I think it's one of the most important ones to watch in the series so far, because it provides such a solid foundation for the conversation about Nomad.
Yeah, it's a foundational part of the class, right? I mean, how to go finance all this stuff. We cover it all in detail. We spent 2 hours going into the financing part. I mean, that's like the main part of how we're dealing with this. I mean, there's definitely other main parts, like, how we deal with tenants and screening tenants, but I think financing it is a big missing piece for a lot of folks who have not thought about doing Nomad before. And then finally, the Nomad book. So part of what we're going to go over tonight, it's basically the how to acquire a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio starting with just $3,000. That whole book and the other presentation, the 2-hour presentation we do on just that, came from this presentation. So I was preparing this presentation a little bit more than a year ago, or maybe a little bit less than a year ago now. And the idea when I was writing the presentation was, okay, let's see how we can come up with a down payment for people that want to do the Nomad, and let's see if we can actually come up with ways to reduce the down payment. And then I thought to myself, so what could I do in order to completely eliminate the need for a down payment, or really, really minimize it down to the bare minimum? And when I did that, I came up with this idea of being able to do the entire Nomad model, starting with a single 1% down payment. And so in our local marketplace, it's a $300,000 house that we model it with. And we say you need $3,000 down, a single $3,000 down payment. And we walk through exactly how to do that. And what that became was the Nomad book. And the Nomad book, you can go reference it. It's open to everybody. learntoberich.com/book. You pick your city. And I try to do different numbers for different cities. Although if your numbers need to change, if you're telling me, hey, you got the numbers for my city wrong, just let me know and we can modify them. But I sat down, I think it was in November, and I just said, okay, put my head down. I'm going to sit down and write this whole book in a weekend, because I knew I had to write it in a weekend in order to get copies printed in time to give them away as Christmas gifts. We gave them away as Christmas gifts last Christmas at the Christmas party. And so I wrote that book in a weekend, and then I put it on the website so that it has all the charts and the generated charts and different cities and stuff all on there. And so, Jason, have you gone through and read that book yet?
I've skimmed through it. I've got a copy of the physical copy. Okay.
And what you skimmed through, did you see anything in there that looked interesting to you, or what did you think of it?
Well, because I'm not, I'm warming up to the idea because of my current house. But because of the past, I didn't anticipate ever doing the lease Nomad model. I'll admit that I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. But I will tell you this, in terms of the most interesting thing that I did pay attention to was the mathematics of the daisy chaining of the deal flow.
Yep.
And that, just because I'm a nerd, so I like that stuff. And you're pretty good about laying it out. That's probably the most important or interesting thing to me, because you start with like you said, with the $3,000 and you build your entire portfolio. I think that, it probably takes folks maybe a couple reading throughs to get it and for it to click. For those of us that are not as mathematically inclined as you are, but it's worth delving into that until it clicks, because when it does click, it's like, holy snarky, this is it's a fascinating model. It's a much more active type of investing model, but wow, I mean, it's pretty powerful if you follow the math.
Yeah. If anyone else has read the book or the website, either one of them, I mean, they're basically the same. The book actually, here's a weird trivia point for you. The book actually has a couple math errors in it. They're relatively small. So it's not going to really affect the model that much, but I've since corrected them. And it had to do with how I was calculating recaptured depreciation.
Oh, come on, man.
Yep. So apparently I was doing it wrong, but I've since corrected it. And so it's correct on the website now, is my understanding. But there's actually a small error in the book. But if anyone has read the book and you kind of want to comment on it, I'd be interested to hear your opinion on that. So I will continue moving on, but feel free to use the chat window while you're doing that. So really, when we're talking about down payment, I kind of break it down into two groups. The one group is reduce the down payment, and then the other group is produce the down payment. So how can we minimize how much we need, first of all, and then how could we go ahead and produce the amount that we need to do? And so I'm going to kind of break down the strategies tonight and talk about both of those. This is just a kind of reminder to me to remind everybody on the call, on the webinar itself, that you still need to have good credit. You still need to have good income. You still need to have low or no other debt to support the loans you're getting in order to make the Nomad work. So down payment is only one piece of the puzzle. You got to have a job. You got to have good credit. You got to have low or no other debt in order to make this work. If you're already at 50% DTI and you're not able to qualify for a loan, it doesn't matter if you have down payment. Okay, it's going to be really, really hard for you to do the model.
James, what's DTI?
That's the income ratio. So it's the ratio of your debts to your income. And that's one of the things that lenders look at in order to loan you money.
Sorry, just when I'm doing webinars, people are always reminding me that I talk in acronyms because I deal with IRS stuff. So no, it's just something I've become cognizant of to try to break out of that habit.
That's why we pay you the big bucks to be on the calls. You ask me those questions about.
Wait, I'm supposed to be getting paid for that? What?
You're volunteering for this. I thought this was like a generosity thing for you.
It is. It's part of the tens of thousands of dollars that I owe you.
Hey, we got this on recording this time. Everybody heard that, right? Everyone heard that. He owes me money. He owes me a lot of money. Yeah, that's funny.
Inside joke.
So we have a couple questions. I'm going to go refill my beverage, but the questions from both Elijah and Liz were, what credit range is considered good for Nomad? And Liz says, what's a good credit score? Can you answer that while I go get some water?
Yeah. So, I mean, just because I've been going through this process lately myself.
Do you feel qualified?
I am not a loan officer or whatnot, and your mileage may vary, but I'll give it a whirl. Okay. Let's wait for James to leave, and then. So, in general, you can get financing on if you're using a FHA or VA loan, you're really going to want to be at 580 or above for your middle FICO score. So there's three of them from the three different bureaus, and then they're all going to be slightly different. And so usually they look at your middle of the three, and so you really want to be at 580 or above. But know that if you're at that minimum kind of score, you're going to end up paying a higher interest rate than somebody with an 800 credit score. Okay, so just do be aware of that. I guess better terms, if you want to be in a better position, or if you are looking at more of the conforming conventional loans. My loan officer told me that 640 is the minimum that her company looks for writing those loans. But at 640, 650, you're going to get pretty decent rates, especially these days because they're low anyway. But you are going to be, maybe a half a point or so worse off than say somebody that's 720 or above. When your credit score hits 680, you kind of roll into another bucket and some better options start opening up. And when you hit 720, you enter yet another different kind of classification. And the difference in options between 720 and 800 are almost nil. So once you hit 720, you're kind of golden child, in a lot of respects.
There may be another tier at 760, but
is there? Okay.
The real answer is, and I appreciate Jason because he actually goes and has some really good data. The real answer is you need to call your lender, because your lender is really going to be able to tell you for your particular situation what's important for you and what the particular programs you're looking at are.
Well, if that's the answer you wanted me to give, you should have just said so.
Well, that's the version for I need to go get a beverage. So. All right, so moving on. So if you have any questions, let me know. You're welcome, Liz. Reduce, minimize price down payment. So searching for properties by lowest price. is one way to get the lowest price and then have the lowest down payment. So if you're doing a fixed percentage, if you're doing 1% down, if you're looking at $200,000 properties, that's $2,000. If you're looking at $300,000 properties, that's $3,000. So look for cheaper properties. And we talked about that. We talked about Find Me properties and how to do the search criteria. And that second quartile I talked about a lot. But often these like lower price properties tend to have deferred maintenance. So I wouldn't recommend holding them long-term because of their CapEx expenses. And here's one way to think about that. Imagine for a minute you're buying a $60,000 property and compare that to buying a $300,000 property. You buy a $60,000 property and it needs new carpet. What's the cost of carpet per square foot? What do you think, Jason? What'd you spend for your LVT?
Oh, good grief. Sore subject, sorry. So I spent all in for a 500 square foot one-bedroom unit of a duplex. I was in over $4,500 for luxury vinyl plank is what they call it. So
4,500 divided by 500 square feet. So that's like $9 a square foot.
Yeah.
So if you're buying a $60,000 property and you're putting in LVT, basically a rental grade flooring for your property, then you're paying $9 a square foot. Now, as a percentage of your rent that you're getting on probably a $60,000 property, that's a very large percentage.
Yes.
Now compare that to going and buying a $300,000 property and you're paying $9 a square foot for LVT, which, by the way, the price you paid for that is really high. You should get better than that. But anyway, different story, and that's why he's sore about it. But if you go and you're buying a $300,000 property and you're paying $9 a square foot for LVT, luxury vinyl tile, or whatever he calls it, luxury plank, then your percentage as a percentage of the rent you're collecting is much lower. So if you're thinking about, what percentage of my rent do I have to set aside for replacing flooring every, 2 or 3 tenants or whatever your number is, the percentage you have on a $60,000 property is way bigger, much larger than the percentage you'd have on a $300,000 property. And so we tend to avoid the very, very bottom of the market, and we tend to invest in what I like to refer to as the second quartile. You think of all the properties right here. This is the very high end of the market. This is the cheapest stuff you can find. This is the middle of the market. We like to be just below the middle, but not at the bottom in this kind of second quartile. This is the first quartile, the cheapest stuff you can find. This is the second quartile that we want to invest in. And that visually is where we tend to want to be doing that. So oftentimes you can go lower in order to get started and buy a property. And then I wouldn't recommend holding those long-term because of those capital expenses like replacing flooring. If you're going to turn them over with lease option exits, if you're going to put a tenant buyer in there and turn them, and then when you sell them, maybe buy a slightly higher quality property, I will reluctantly and hesitantly approve of that model. Okay, so you can go ahead and buy those and turn them over and get out of them. I think that's okay. It might be easier to find tenant buyers with 5% down with the second quartile properties. So it's harder to find tenant buyers with down payments in that kind of bottom percentage, the bottom 25%. A lot easier to find them in the second quartile. And so we talk about that a little bit too.
Quick question for you there in Fort Collins. The majority of the activity in your market is actually in that third quartile, isn't it? Just in terms of overall market activity?
No, I think by the very nature of it, they're broken down into quarters.
I just realized that was a really stupid mathematical question.
So the answer to your question is no. By the sheer math, it means that 25% of the transactions happen in that second quartile.
Didn't I say earlier that James was much more mathematically inclined than I was? Sorry, I cannot believe I just asked that.
There are no stupid questions.
Oh, boy. It's the cough medicine, I swear.
Yes, it probably is cough medicine. I'm going to say, sometimes in class on Wednesday night, Brian will say something, and I'll raise my hand to ask a question, not because I don't know the answer, but so I almost like alley-oop to Brian so that he gets like slam dunk and kind of give like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. Let me go into detail on that, right?
Yeah.
But the fear is, Tam even says in class, she's like, you got to be careful when you ask questions like that, because some people might think James actually doesn't know what depreciation is or what this is. And it's not the case at all. It is, Brian and I had these conversations so long that I'm like, hey, are you going to talk about depreciation? And so I'll say, hey, so what does depreciation look like on something like that? As if I don't know what the depreciation is going to look like on that. So it's this kind of weird thing.
Let me rephrase the question.
Yes, what's the rephrasing of the question?
In terms of, because you represent mostly the buyer side of the transaction,
About 90% of my transactions.
Not listings. Okay. So is the majority of the interest that you get from your buyer clients, is it in the second or the third quartile in terms of the properties they are looking for?
Second, and partially because that's what we teach.
Okay, so it's
second.
Skewed. Okay.
Yeah, it's probably skewed because of my
because of Nomad.
Yeah, I think that's partially true too.
Okay, so still a dumb question.
I should probably also warn people. There's definitely parts of this conversation where it seems really simple and everything like that. If you guys hold out to the end, I'm going to show you something amazing. So I know that some of this stuff is really simple, and I'm covering it to be comprehensive, but there's some freaking amazing stuff in this presentation at the end. So stick around in case you're wondering. All right, special note about strong sellers market. The lower price point in our local market is extremely challenging to buy in. There are multiple offers, buyers paying more than asking price and sometimes more than appraised value. And this is a slide showing you that. So I'm going to take a moment to go over this slide. And you should understand, even if you're not in Loveland, Colorado, which is where this is a chart showing from, you should realize too that this is a tendency that happens in most markets. It's not just our local market. So here's what this chart is. On the left-hand side, it shows you the ratio of the sold price compared to the list price. So if you look at this line for 100, that means that a property that is sitting, each dot is a property, by the way, but a property that is sitting on the 100 means that the property was listed for and sold for the same amount. So let's say a property is listed for $300,000, it then sold for $300,000 if that's the case. The chart, the kind of range on the bottom part of it is the actual price. And so what this chart shows is a scatter chart of how much are properties selling above or below list price broken out by price range. For example, all properties that sold for $200,000 appear on this line. If I can draw it vertically. Ooh, you know something? I've got an ability to annotate. There we go. I'm going to draw a line. So everything on this line here, 200,000, those sold for it's not straight, but those sold for $200,000. Okay, so any property, any dot that appeared on there sold for $200,000. However, the dots that show up above here, so this one right here about, I don't know, whatever this is, that's probably sold for about 5% above asking price. So it sold for $10,000 above asking price. Ones that show up below the line, like this one is probably, I don't know, $20,000, and that's sold for 8% or so below asking price. Does that make sense, Jason?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things I want to show you, though, is that we're seeing a lot more properties selling for above asking price in this lower price range. Once we get above 400,000, there's not nearly as many dots above this 100 line, which is the sold price to list price where they're equal. If it's lower than that, and as we get above 400,000, we're seeing most of the stuff sell for below asking price. There's a couple that sold for at asking price and a couple that sold for above, but the majority of them are below. And so you can see in the hotter part of the market, the lower part of the market, we're seeing more people being willing to bid above asking price and bid kind of above. I mean, I guess it is what it is. It's bidding above. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Let's move on. All right, so produce, down payment sources. So in my opinion, I'm going to go through a list of all the different ways you can come up with down payment for Nomad. And I may have missed one or two. If I did, go ahead and let me know. But these are, in my opinion, my preference order. So the least I prefer is on top. The most I prefer is on bottom. And some of these I don't recommend at all, but I'm going to talk about them. So let's go and start with the top one, which is the one I don't recommend. What we call investment cards, also known as credit cards.
Yeah. Sorry.
So here's the idea. Let's say you have amazing credit. Let's say you have a $50,000 credit line on your credit card. Let's say your debt to income ratio is like perfect because you don't have a car debt, you don't have student loan debt, you don't have any debt at all. But you don't have any savings either. You're basically living paycheck to paycheck. You've got no money in the bank account. You don't have enough money for down payment. One thing you could do, and I don't recommend you do it, one thing you could do is you could say, okay, for the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, instead of actually taking the cash that I earn from my paycheck and buying groceries or gas in the car or paying your insurance bill or whatever you're doing, instead of actually paying for those things with cash, which is what you've been normally doing, instead of doing that, you are going to put your groceries and your gas and everything else on a credit card, and you're going to hoard the cash that you would have gotten from your paycheck, and you're going to put it into your savings account and save up money for the down payment that you need. And the reason you might want to do that versus just trying to figure out a way to borrow the down payment is the lenders want to see that you have your down payment and savings, not that you're going to come and use a credit card cash advance fee in order to borrow the down payment. They don't like to see that. Okay. But for some reason, they're okay if you go out there and you put, grocery money on there and going to the movies money and things like that. Now that I told you exactly what I'm talking about, do not do that crap. Okay. I think it's a bad idea. But if it comes down to it and that's the only way you can get it done, then you can talk to your advisor and talk to your spouse and make sure that you feel comfortable with it. You can do that, but I would not recommend it. I would recommend doing all the other things first. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I have a variation on this that I actually do myself. I won't get into, but there's a way you can actually.
So this is like hey, this is what James tells me not to do, but let me tell you about the variation of it.
No, I pay off the cards every Monday, but I put everything on my cards.
Yeah.
And I do it to maximize the. I guess I will talk about it. To maximize the cash back categories.
Yeah.
On particular cards.
Yeah.
And it can actually add up to $120 a month. And that goes into the kitty.
Yeah. So I will tell you, I do not do that. And I understand the math behind it, but it is just not something I do, nor would I recommend to anybody.
You got to watch it very carefully, and you just got to make sure you pay them off every, like I said, I do it every week. I pay them off.
I do. So you can listen to Jason, but I don't do that. So. All right, cool. So that's the investment card one, the one I don't recommend you do. And I've got slides for pretty much the other ones, but here's the list in order. So I'll kind of talk about what they're going to be. So security deposits, when you actually, especially in Colorado, when you get a security deposit, somebody gives you a deposit and they're going to rent your property. In Colorado, you can actually, as long as you're not a real estate broker, you can actually spend that money. You do not need to necessarily save it.
Really?
Now, and I do not recommend you do this, but it is yours to do with as you please. You do not need to keep it in its own separate account. You don't need to keep it in a trust account or an escrow account, and that is Colorado only. So this is why you need to get together on Thursday night and talk to your other people and find out, what's working and what's not working in your market and what the rules are. But in Colorado, if someone gives you a $2,000 security deposit, you do not need to keep it in a separate account. You do not need to save it. You could, although you should not, use that money for a down payment in order to do a property. Now realize, let's say someone gives you a $2,000 security deposit and they tell you a month after they move in that they are breaking their lease and that they want their security deposit back. You need a way to come up with that money. So it is not something that you can say, I don't have it, I can't give it back to you. There are rules about how quickly you need to get it back to them. So this is why I do not normally recommend it, but it is something you could tap into as a down payment source, and we'll talk about that here in another slide. Maintenance reserves. So as we do our analysis, remember when we did our whole class on cash analysis and doing the analysis on the property, we had a certain percentage of the rent coming in going into a maintenance reserve account, and we were going to use that money to pay maintenance on a property. Well, that maintenance reserve account builds up over time, and you're setting it aside to pay for things like new carpet and paint and plumbers and electricians and things like that that you need for your property. But you could, if you have enough in your maintenance reserve account, especially if you've got multiple properties, you could temporarily use money from your maintenance reserve account to do down payment as a down payment source. Okay. I like that better than security deposits. I like that better than investment cards, but I don't like it a lot. And you'll see kind of as we go. Next one we're going to talk about is property equity. As your properties kind of go up in value and you pay down the loan on your property, you have a certain amount of equity left in your property. And at some point you can actually borrow some of that equity out and use it to purchase additional properties to do that. Depreciation. A lot of times when we talk about depreciation, I talk about it as a way to offset negative cash flow on a property. But if you could use it in structure, and I'm going to talk about this in the slide in detail, you can actually use it to bring in chunks of money, or usually around tax time, when you would normally be able to get your tax return back, you'd be able to use some of that depreciation and use that as a down payment. Vita says, also subject to treble damages if unable to return security deposit minus allowable charges on security deposit. Yeah, you need to have that money available, and if you can't do it, there are additional damages you can have. So it is a very risky thing to do, which is why it's only the second thing on my list of the things I like least. So
just real quick on that. For those of you that live in Washington, if there is anybody. I know we had somebody from Seattle last week on. Do not do that in Washington State. You can actually go to jail for doing this.
There you go. So go check with your local guys on Thursday.
Exactly.
In Colorado, you can. In other states, you probably shouldn't do it anyway, right? I mean, this is what we're talking about. So investment cards, no. Security deposit, no. But these are strategies you could use if it comes down to a pinch, except in Washington, apparently. All right, so where was I? Retirement account. So you could go and access money in your retirement account, and sometimes it's worth paying the penalty in order to acquire a property in your retirement account. So we're going to have a slide on that. The legacy nomad model, there's a whole model we talk about. It's one of the nomad strategies, legacy nomad. It's one of the ones I'm doing with my kids. Basically, it is the parents or the grandparents or some other family member or very close family friend is gifting down payment money to the kids in order to be able to go buy properties. And so you can actually use that in order to get down payment. We're going to talk about that tonight too. Sell stuff you don't need or want. You're moving. This is your opportunity to sell stuff out of your house that you don't want to move. So you can go ahead and do that. And that's a preferred way. This is getting toward the list of the top ones. Saving. That's one that you probably were thinking it was coming, right? From your regular job, part-time job, extra job, or business to fund your retirement or build your fortune. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And then my favorite one is lease option fees. Okay, so here are the list of all the different sources of down payments, and I'm going to go into detail on each one. Do you have any questions on that before we jump into security deposits, Jason?
Not I.
Okay. So again, this is not my favorite one, but security deposits. With straight rentals, when tenants rent your property, you usually collect a security deposit. It's different than when a tenant buyer gives you an option fee, which we're going to discuss later as a totally different strategy. But that one is different than security deposits. Okay. Some states, like Colorado, you do not need to hold this in a separate trust or escrow account, but in many states you do. Okay. So check with your local laws to make sure before you do this, or in my opinion, skip this one altogether and do a different one. Do one of the more, one that I think is better. So you could use this temporarily for down payments. Still need to be able to return the security deposit when the tenant moves out. So make sure you have a plan to replace that. Any questions? Pretty obvious stuff, right?
Yeah.
Maintenance reserves. We recommend you set aside money for maintenance on your nomad rental properties. And this account can get pretty large, especially if you've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it is properties you have, and you're putting aside, $100 or $200 a month from each rental property. That account can become large, and it could become large. Now, it's something that you need to have in place because maintenance is going to come up and you're needing to pay out of it, but it may not be all needing maintenance all at the same time. You may have a tenant that stays there for 5 years, and the property, you really have very little maintenance on that particular property, so that account grows a little bit larger. And then you have another one that has turnover, and you kind of need some money from that. So over time, though, that account does tend to have money in it if you're running your properties correctly, and you could use that money temporarily again as down payments. You still need to replace it. So the money that you would otherwise be saving, you'd want to replace that money in your maintenance reserve instead of just kind of letting it go and not doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And what would you say for, because that I'm not, I have everything in a general account that I collect everything in.
Don't do that.
And I don't have a separate maintenance reserve. So what advice would, and you know what? A lot of people don't, even though you tell us to.
Yep.
So
my advice is the same as before. Do a separate account. I think that's what you're getting at, right? So what do you recommend if we're not doing what we said you should do? Well, do what I told you to do. Is put it in a separate account. Put it in a maintenance account. Because I think you should have that in a separate maintenance account, kind of aside somewhere. Did I kind of embarrass you?
No, fair enough. No, you're right. I'm just, it's just that. I'm just saying that there's what is taught and there's what most people actually do.
True. And a lot of times I will tell you, listen, human nature makes it hard to do this.
Correct.
Here's the exception to the rule. But in this case, just do the right thing. Human nature is not that hard to fix this, right? You go get an account, you put a certain amount of money in there each month, you can set it up to auto draft.
That's true.
Yeah. So this is one that don't let your human nature get in the way, just do it right. Because it's better to be safe than sorry on this one. All right, now that I told you the answer and I've embarrassed you, I'll tell you the other answer to this. Some people use credit cards to fund this.
Ooh.
Right?
Ouch. Yeah,
So
I guess I haven't thought about that.
So that's the other way that people do it, right? They don't put any money aside for maintenance, And then what they do is if they have a maintenance call, they put the repairs or whatever it is, the plumber, on the credit card, and then they use the money, the cash flow from the property, to pay off the credit card.
That would worry me, because if you have something major come through, I mean, how much is a roof?
$10K.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't have a single credit card that has a 10 grand limit. I'd have to use like 4 different cards,
All right, don't do that. Yeah, so really it's to save the money. That's the idea. Is really you should be saving the money. But there are some people that they believe, I've got the ability, I've got resources elsewhere that I could do it. I don't need to put it in a separate account. But you should put it in a separate account. All right, so getting back to this, we recommend set aside money in maintenance for your Nomad rental properties. You could temporarily use this money as down payments. Again, not high on my list. Well, it is high on my list, but it's high on my list because my least favorite one's at the top. So it's not low on my list, if that makes any sense. You still need to have money set aside for repairs. Another reason why new construction Nomad, lower repair money might be slightly better. So imagine this. We're going to go look at new construction properties. Why? Because normally we're setting aside 10, 12, 15%, whatever the number is, as a maintenance reserve on each property. If we've got new construction and it's got a warranty in the first year, what's the chance that we're going to have a good amount of the money set aside for the maintenance just sitting there, not doing anything for the first year, 2, 3, whatever it is? I think it's higher. It's much more probable. And so if you go do a new construction Nomad, you're able to move into the property and live there, and you've got a really low maintenance requirement for it, it means that you can actually temporarily borrow from that maintenance reserve in order to do that. Vita also says, in Colorado, roofs are often replaced with insurance hail damage claims. Sure. Yeah, if you basically are replacing your roof with hail, totally. But not every roof is a hail damage claim. There are times when a roof manages miraculously to go 20 years and it is just not in, it's just not a good roof at that point, and you need to replace it. And we end up, negotiating roofs as far as purchases a lot of times because there's no hail claim that they can do. But yeah, if you can do a hail claim, consider that if it's a legit hail claim. Okay, so maintenance reserve. We talked enough about that. So property equity, cash out refinance for down payments. In order to do this, in most cases, since you're moving out of the property and it's probably going to be a investment property at this point, you're going to need to have more than 20% of equity in order to even do it. And really, because you want to borrow out the 5% down, you're really going to need 26% of equity. If you include some refinance fees and a little bit of fudge numbers in there, plus the 5% down payment, plus the 20% that they're going to want you to keep in the property, because you're only going to be able to do 80% loan to value on the refi. So in those cases, right, you're going to need to have 26% of equity. Well, if the market's only going up 3% a year and you're only paying down, 1% a year, whatever it is on the loan the first few years, probably a little bit more than that. So you're really only gaining 4% a year for doing that. You're going to need 6 or 7 years in order to get to the point where you're going to have 26% of equity, where you can actually refinance out, cash out, refinance out enough down payment for your other Nomad properties. If you're buying one a year, that means in year 7, you might not need any more down payments because you could go back to the first one you bought, do a cash out refinance, pull out 5% to buy property number 7. Then in year 8, you go cash out refinance property number 2 and use that to pay for year 8. In year 9, you can go do number 3. In year 10, you can go do number 4. And then you've kind of self-funded for 7, 8, 9, and 10 or so doing that. Does that make sense, Jason?
Yeah. What do you think are the biggest things you need to look out for in this, though? Because I mean, I don't know. There's some risks to doing this too. I mean, not like the credit cards or whatever, but
well, I don't think it's actually as big of a risk as most people make it out to, because you still have 20% of equity in the property, right? It's not like you're refinancing up to 100%. You're still leaving 20% of equity in the property, and you're financing out 5%. Is there a cost to doing that money? Sure. Is there an interest rate risk? If interest rates have gone up and now you're refinancing 3.5% loan to a 4% loan, sure. You've got those types of risks. But as far as like loan to value risk, I'm totally comfortable with doing that. Okay. Now, let me say it this way. I would rather see you save 5% and actually pay it down. But again, this is sort of high on my list, meaning it's not my preferred way of doing it, but it is a way that you can do it, okay? I'd rather see you save, which is my second favorite way, and I'd rather see you do lease options is kind of my other way. Vita also points out, with new construction, remember, new yard, fence, and window coverings, and she's absolutely right. There are some added expenses of doing new construction properties, but a lot of times we can finance those in, and it's not an issue. So, and a lot of builders will allow you to finance in the new backyard. Most of the time they include the front yard, but you can finance in the backyard. Some of them will require you to do a fence. Some of them will not. So sometimes you don't need to worry about the fence. But window coverings, a lot of times they'll allow you to finance them in too. And that is a hidden expense of doing new construction. She's right about that. All right, so this is the idea. Now, here's the exception, right? We're in Colorado. We're in northern Colorado, and the market last year went up, I don't know, depending on whose numbers you believe, 8% to 10%, okay? So a property that was worth $300,000 last year is now worth $330,000 this year. And then next year, if it goes up another 10%, it's going to be worth $360,000. So when you're gaining 10% a year, it really only takes like 3 years in order to get probably enough for 20% of equity and 5% down payment. So you don't need to wait that full 7 years or whatever I was talking about early on, right?
Right.
So in Colorado, it might be faster. Don't count on it. Make a better plan. Have a better backup plan, or have a better primary plan. And this could be a possible, wow, it did much better than I thought. Let's go ahead and take advantage of some of this stuff and maybe consider doing that. Vita also says, remember your tenant helps you buy the property with very little of your money invested. Sure. I mean, that's what we're talking about with Nomad largely. And we're going to go into a lot more detail on that. Okay. So this particular strategy of property equity, using the internal equity in the properties that you have, ideally ones that you bought before, to acquire new properties using the equity and refinancing out, works better in markets that are fastly appreciating, more so than the 3% we model in the strategy. So when I'm going and doing a strategy later on, I'm telling you property values are going up 3% a year. This model of using refinancing of equity, which I don't usually include in the strategy, we're not modeling this. We usually say you need the down payment or you're doing lease options, but it works better if you're doing more than 3%. And it does not usually work well with lease option exits. So let me talk about what I mean by that. Are we going, so Jason, you bought a property for number one. Let's say, a couple of years from now, you decide I'm going to go do a lease option exit on that property. I'm going to go find a tenant buyer. I'm going to lease the property to them. I'm going to give them an option to buy it from me. And they're going to remain in the property for a year, 2 years, or 3 years. And then they're going to actually exercise their option and purchase the property from me. Right? Follow along so far?
Yep.
So do we usually go and refinance the properties that a tenant buyer has an option to buy it on? Are we going and usually refinancing, pulling equity out of those properties?
No.
No, we're not usually doing that, okay? You could, but it's not something that we usually do, nor do we advocate doing, okay? So it doesn't work as well when you're doing lease option exits because you're not able to borrow that money out and do it. So don't plan on doing both the lease option and borrowing money out of your equity. I don't think it's a good thing to do. Can you do it? Sure. I don't recommend it. Okay, depreciation. I'm so glad we've got our resident tax professional in-house on this. Okay, so normally when we teach depreciation, we think of it in two ways. Number one, we can think of it as a way to completely eliminate or at least mostly reduce negative cash flow. So if you have, and this is how I normally talk about it, if you have, a $300,000 property, and the really rough rule of thumb for calculating depreciation, for those of you that don't know, is you take the value of the property and you multiply it by 3%, and that gives you the approximate amount of depreciation benefit you get per year. So a $300,000 property, you have about $9,000 per year in depreciation benefit. So if you made $100,000 a year, you can take the $100,000 a year that you earned, you subtract the $9,000 of depreciation benefit, and you end up only paying taxes now on the $91,000 that's remaining. Is that an oversimplification, Jason, or is that pretty much right on?
You're a rock star.
Okay, cool. So the way to think about the depreciation method is, what is the amount of tax I saved? And the way to think about this is you have $9,000 in reduced income. If you multiply that $9,000 in reduced income by whatever your effective tax rate is, the combined amount of your overall tax amount, that is the amount of cash you would get to have in your pocket at the end of the year instead of having to pay it to the government. Okay? So if your tax rate is 15% and we're seeing a $9,000 tax benefit, 15% times 9,000 is about $13,500 if I'm not mistaken, right? $1,350. My math right?
Yep.
So basically, at the end of the year, you would have seen $1,350 in extra cash in your pocket that you didn't have to pay Uncle Sam because of this depreciation benefit. So if you had negative $100 a month cash flow on the property, when you did your analysis, realize that you don't have negative cash flow anymore. when you take into account the depreciation you just got from your tax return and the negative $100 you had in your cash flow, really you're positive $150 for the year. Okay? So that's how we normally talk about depreciation. We go into a lot more detail when we do the analysis and stuff like that. Go watch that video. However, there's another way to think about this. Oh, what's Vita says something else. Let me see here. Remember, tenant helps you buy. Also, real estate values tend to cycle up and down, but overall up. Yes, I would agree with that. And we kind of model that with 3% over a very long period of time. But yeah, you could be buying properties at a discount. If the market goes down, you're basically buying your stuff on sale. And then as properties go up, you're able to kind of reap some of the reward from that. Okay, so here's the alternative. The one way we usually think about depreciation is this kind of eliminating or at least reducing negative cash flow. But the other way of thinking about it is this. You could collect the amount of money you're getting in your paychecks from your job by making, what do you call them, exemptions? Is that what you call them, Jason?
Yep.
So you can adjust the number of exemptions you're kind of claiming with the government up or down. If you have, more money, you think you're going to owe less in tax, you can increase your exemptions. Is that how it works?
Right.
So basically, you can increase your number of exemptions and say, I'm not going to need to pay you as much tax at the end of the year, so I want to increase the number of exemptions I have. And then each week or bi-week or monthly, whenever you get your paycheck, you get a little bit more because you're going to have this depreciation and not have to have taxes at the end of the year. So you could collect this depreciation monthly by doing that.
And in the example that you're talking about with the $9,000 at a 15% tax rate,
Yep.
That's $112 a month. And if you put that aside, it doesn't sound like a lot now, but over time it adds up.
Yeah, and so here's the thought, right? So we've been talking about this to eliminate the negative cash flow. And if you have a negative $100 a month in cash flow, then you can change your exemptions, and each month in your paycheck, you can get that $112 or whatever it is that offsets the cash flow. At the end of the year, you basically didn't even see the difference because you're getting it more in your paycheck, and you got to pay the mortgage and all your taxes and insurance on the property and everything else, and so it washes out monthly. Or you can say, I know that I'm going to need to feed this property throughout the year, or break even on the property at the year. But at the very end of the year, I want a big chunk of cash. Okay, so let's say you happen to be in a 25% tax bracket, and so the effective tax rate. And so you have $9,000 depreciation on one property. 25% of that is the amount of money you'd get back on your tax return at the end of the year. So 25% of $9,000 is about $2,500, $2,250, I should say. So it's about $2,200 or so. At the end of the year, you could get a $2,200 chunk of money that you could then use as your down payment. And if you think about it, this could be the plan where every year when you get your tax return and you get $2,000 from one property and $2,000 from another property and $2,000 from another property, you could take all that money combined together, and that could then be your down payment for the next property that you buy in April or May.
Agreed.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So you could almost look at it, if you're going to use your depreciation as this forced savings plan to get big chunks of money at the end of the year, the negative cash flow you're getting over the course of the year is you financing the down payments both for the previous property, but also financing it because you're not offsetting it with depreciation. You're financing your new down payment for the next property. Okay, so for the people that psychologically have a hard time saving money, it would be better to collect depreciation as a rebate on your taxes than as cash flow from depreciation in your paychecks.
Yeah, and in case people missed what James just said, it compounds with additional properties.
Yes. Yeah, so on the first one, for the year, you may be making, let's call it $2,000. It may be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, depending on the property and your tax rate, right? But let's say you're getting $2,000 back at the end of the year. That's on one property. If you do this on two properties, now you get $4,000. Do it on three, you get $6,000. Eventually, you can get to the point where the money you're saving on your taxes from depreciation is enough to do the down payment.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the price of the properties and how you're doing that, it could be a pretty significant way to do this. By property 7, you're able to get the overwhelming majority of a 5% down property on the same price property.
Yeah.
Really roughly. And a part of it depends on your tax rate too.
Right.
Okay. Vita also says maybe able to increase exemptions on first owner occupant property. Sure. You could do this on the first one. With the depreciation thing, you're going to get the benefits on the first rental. But if you're doing your first owner occupant, you're doing itemization of taxes and stuff like that. I think you could do it on the first owner occupant. Tax guy, what do you think?
Well, don't forget, so when you're an owner occupant, right, you don't get the benefit of depreciation, but you get to deduct the interest on your Schedule A, right? And
you would
then
know more than I would.
well, and then once you make, after year one and you make the property a rental property, not only do you get to deduct the depreciation, you still get to deduct the interest. It's just on a different form.
And you and I had this discussion because we were talking once before, and you said, I don't think you're adequately discussing interest deduction, the tax benefits of interest in your calculations. And I tried to explain to you that I think I am, but in a different way. And I think the way that I'm doing it is I'm saying we're only going to pay taxes on the cash flow.
Right.
Because we're already going to say we're making $1,800 in rent, we've got $1,500 in expenses, so we're only going to pay the difference on that $300 net.
Yeah, it was an interesting email thread because you were looking at it from a real estate investor perspective on the cash flow. Yeah. I was looking at it from a tax nerd perspective from the tax side.
Yes.
And we were kind of miscommunicating and not really meeting in the middle.
That's right. Yeah. And then I said, so here's how I'm thinking about it, and I laid out like a story, and you're like, okay, now I see what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right, cool. So you don't get, and just so you know, you do not get this depreciation when you're living in the property for the first year, unless you're renting to a roommate, and then you can take partial depreciation. But verify that with your tax advisor, because I think there's some exceptions for that.
And also don't forget, it's worth mentioning that if you ever do sell the property, you have to do what's called depreciation recapture, which gets into a very complicated thing you probably don't want to get into. But just be aware that any depreciation that you take or could have taken, you have to account for that in your capital gains calculation if you ever dispose of the property. So don't forget about that.
And so for you really geeky engineering tax nerd-ish people, I do take into account depreciation recapture in the book. So if you're going to learntobirich.com/book, I do that calculation for you correctly.
On the just to be clear, on the lease option model.
Yes. Yeah, and the lease option exit. So when you're selling these properties, I'm saying you're paying long-term cap gains because you've held it longer than a year, and you are paying a depreciation recapture. And so the amount that goes into your bank account is actually after all taxes and depreciation recapture. And so the model is absolutely correct.
There's an alternative model there where if because of financial circumstances or whatnot, you're not doing one property a year, you're actually on more of a one property every 2 or 3 years, then you can claim the capital gain exemption if you lived in the property for at least 2 of the previous 5 years.
That's true. Although we do not use that model in the book or anything like that.
Yeah.
But that is true. If you lived in each property for 2 years out of the last 5 and you sold it before 3 years after you moved out came up, then you could do that. But that is not what we're teaching. It is a small tax advantage strategy for doing it that way.
Yeah. Well, if you're in a rapidly appreciating market, it can actually be a significant strategy. And I think that there are arguments that could be made, not that you want to get into this right now, but for moving back into a property at some point, perhaps.
Yes, I'll tell you what, since I need to do the other side of drinking my water, why don't you go ahead and quickly explain what that is? I'll be right back.
Sure. So, basically summarized there, but if you live in a property for, like I said, 2 of the previous 5 years, then you don't have to pay. You get a capital gains exclusion up to $250,000, $500,000 if you are a married couple on the capital gains. So you don't have to pay taxes on that capital gain when you sell the property. And one of the strategies there is, let's say that you bought the property now. You're doing normal Nomad, and you live in it for a year. And then, 3 years down the road, you decide, okay, this property has appreciated enough or other circumstances have changed where I'm going to want to sell this property. Well, just move back in when a tenant moves out, live in it for another year, and then sell the property and walk away with the dough tax-free. It's a very viable plan for the right circumstances.
Now I'll tell you, now that he's explained to you what you're doing, we don't normally teach that with Nomad because I don't think it's worth the extra effort and slowing down the Nomad model by delaying buying an additional property for a year just to save cap gains.
Yeah.
Because cap gains is only what? Long-term cap gains is what, 15%?
Correct. Well, it's one of the interesting things. The capital gains tax rate is one of the most or more frequently fiddled with things by Congress.
So it could change over time, is what you're saying.
It's one of the things that's more likely to change compared to other things in the tax code. And so with that in mind, it can be part of your tax strategy, especially not knowing what's going to happen down the road.
Yeah, so we can adjust this. If Nomad, if you end up having a change the tax code where it becomes significantly advantageous to do this, we will start teaching that as a strategy. Until then, don't bother.
But hey, I got to fill airtime while you did your thing.
Well, and it's important for people to understand that because I get that question a lot. People will say to me, hey, so are you living in the property for 2 years in order to have the tax advantages? And the answer is no, because we don't plan on selling the property. We plan on keeping it with plain vanilla Nomad 40 years, and it doesn't matter. We're doing lease option stuff. We're just taking the tax hit because it's a speed thing with effort, and we're willing to pay the tax penalty instead of staying around and slowing things down. It's better for you to have 2 properties that you bought in 2 years, an additional one property, 2 properties total, and for you to stay in the property for 2 years just to get the tax benefit. You would do better buying the second property. That's the way to think about it.
Yeah.
Okay. So retirement accounts. We're getting to my better ones as we go along, but this is a simple one, right? Retirement account. So use some money from your retirement account to fund your retirement. You've gone ahead and over the years, maybe you've saved up $50,000, $100,000, $500,000, $1 million, whatever it is, in your stock portfolio retirement account. And maybe it's in a kind of like protected retirement account where you've done it tax advantaged or it's tax free now, Roth IRA or whatever it is, and you've got a chunk of money sitting there, and you're like, I don't have enough money to do Nomad because I've got $400,000 in my stock account, and I can't take that out without paying the penalty. I'll save you the trouble. You can go do the math yourself and prove it to yourself. But let me save you the trouble. Paying the penalty in order to take out just enough money. I'm not saying cash the whole thing in. Make sure everyone hears me. Do not cash in all of your retirement money, okay? But taking out just enough to do a down payment, maybe once a year, in order to acquire an additional Nomad property, one at a time. Don't do it all at once, but one at a time. You go take out $15,000 or whatever you need to take out in order to net $15,000 in order to do down payment. I think might be a really good idea because the returns you're getting on that $15,000, the percentage returns you're getting, is worth paying the taxes and the penalty. What are the taxes and penalty, Jason? I don't even know what they are.
Well, you pay your regular income taxes on the distribution, okay. And then there's a 10% additional penalty of the amount withdrawn. So if you take out $5,000, it's $500. Okay,
so I'm saying this: the returns we're getting with Nomad are insane numbers. I mean, they're like over 100% when you're doing these really low down payments. So are you willing to say, I'm going to pay a 10% penalty and my normal income tax on money, which I should have paid anyway if it wasn't tax advantage. So it's not like you're doing something extra. It's really what you would have paid if you didn't have a tax advantage.
It's deferred.
Going in the first place. Okay. So are you willing to go pay that, the normal income tax on it and a small penalty, 10% or whatever the number is. I don't care if it's 10%, 15, 20, it doesn't matter, in order to get 100% return per year for a number of years in the future.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Did I ever tell you this? When I bought my first Nomad property, I had an IRA with like $5,500 in it. So 1 year's worth of contribution from a prior year. Yeah. And it was doing nothing. The market was doing nothing. I hated seeing the money sat there. I actually pulled that money out to pay my closing costs on property number 1. I don't know if I ever told you that or not.
You didn't tell me, but it makes sense mathematically to do it. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't surprise me, and you should do it. Now, like I said at the very beginning of this slide, James did not tell you, oh, James said, go take my $1 million stock portfolio, cash it all out. I did not say that, okay? I said, go take out $15,000 and go buy a $300,000 property with it.
Right.
Not $500,000. I don't want you to be doing that because I don't want you going and spending the money. You know, it's protected from you. You're protecting yourself by keeping it in this kind of tax-deferred account, and it scares you enough that you're not willing to touch it in most cases when you want to go buy a new car or boat or whatever you want to do. But now I'm telling you, if you are going to take it and use it as a down payment to buy, because think of it this way, you're converting your money in retirement from stocks and bonds and CDs or whatever you have it in to real estate. And if you do it in a small enough amount, I think that's totally okay. If you've got a balanced portfolio. And some people ask me, so I only have 15K in there. Should I liquidate the whole thing? Totally up to you. But if it were me, I would. I would take out the $15,000. I'd pay the penalty on it, and I'd buy a single house because the returns you're going to get on that house far outweigh the money that you have in the stock market.
You know, on in some of the other presentations, it might be in Nomad 101 or maybe the catch-up Nomad or something. You have some really, really compelling charts showing long-term stock market at aggressive assumptions of 10% a year versus doing Nomad. And so if it makes sense if you look. Just people should look at those. It's very compelling.
Yeah, and the assumptions for Nomad, in my opinion, are really conservative. And
Correct.
The premium people can go model their own numbers and do their assumptions another way. So Donna also says many accounts you can loan against it for low interest rate also. Yeah, so totally. That's another way to look at it. Instead of cashing them out and paying the penalty, you could borrow against it. Although, in my opinion, and it's only my opinion, and it's probably mathematically wrong, but in my opinion, I would cash it out than borrow against it, because I don't want to be borrowing and have it be even leveraged more. The Nomad model is already very, very aggressively leveraged, and I would rather actually take the cash out, take the risk of the market out of the equation for that money, and put it in the real estate market, and almost think of it as its own. Jason, we never really talked about this, but I want to do a presentation on this one time. The idea of Nomad is almost like a venture capital or angel investor, someone taking a very small portion of their whole kind of portfolio and putting it into a highly leveraged, high risk, high return sort of thing. And I don't think it's high risk, but it's that sort of like mentality of, I'm going to take $15,000 of my overall account and I'm going to put it into this property and have it be highly leveraged because I expect to get really, really good returns on that. And think of each house as its own little mini business investment, where you're doing almost angel investing in yourself for the retirement doing it.
Absolutely.
There's something there. I haven't completely formulated my thoughts, but we should do a class on that.
Well, the majority of the angel investors that invest in my tech startup here in Seattle, the typical check size is $25,000. Okay, that's just the norm. Down in Silicon Valley, it's about $50,000. But $50,000. Well, $25,000 sounds a lot like a down payment, doesn't it?
It sounds perfectly like a down payment.
And
are these guys getting 100% return on their money? And there you go.
Sorry. No,
there's a whole class on this coming up. I'm sure of it.
The average, there was actually numbers that were put out by the Seattle Angel Conference that we were kind of a competitor at, and they did a report over the past I want to say 3 or 4 years. Seattle angel investors have averaged 6.5% per year return.
Yeah. Out
of their angel portfolios, and if you ask me, that's horrible. Okay. I laughed.
Let me put this in perspective. The return on investment, and these are just numbers I know from memory, but you can kind of do your own numbers when you want to. If you say the property just has break-even cash flow, it doesn't have any positive cash flow, it doesn't have negative cash flow, the property is not going up in value. Basically, you bought a $300,000 property, it's $300,000. Next year, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, you get no tax benefits. Let's just assume that the tax law changes and you no longer get tax benefits from owning real estate. If you ignore the 3 returns that we just talked about, but you just get return from debt pay down, you pay your mortgage every month, you pay your mortgage down a certain amount, the return you get from doing the 5% Nomad is about 10% per year on your money.
Correct.
So if you just ignored cash flow, appreciation, and depreciation, you ignore those three ones, which I think two of them are speculative. I think appreciation is speculative, and I think cash flow is a little bit speculative, right? Because you don't have control over those. Those are market conditions.
Right.
Okay. The depreciation one I think is less speculative because as long as they give you the tax benefit, you get it. But of all the ones, if I were to use the word guaranteed, which I don't like to use, especially when we talk about returns, because the word guaranteed, it's like a big taboo in the real estate or the investing world in general.
It's a loaded word.
Yeah, you don't like this. The security guys, they don't like you coming in and using the word guaranteed. But as close as you can come to the word guaranteed as possible without actually saying the word guaranteed. If you make your mortgage payment, you are getting that return. It's just fact. Because if you make those payments every month, at the end of a 30-year period, if you got a 30-year loan, you have paid off the balance of the mortgage. You've gotten that amount of money on your overall investment.
And the best part of that is that debt pay down comes from OPM, other people's money.
That's right. As long as you break even on the cash flow, really it's being paid by the tenants.
Yeah.
Yep. So interesting thing, the angel investor guys, their average return is 6%. If you don't get appreciation, depreciation, or cash flow, if you just pay down your debt, you almost double their return.
You're beating Silicon Valley just from paying your freaking mortgage.
We're going to get T-shirts made. We're going to get Nomad T-shirts made that says you beat Silicon Valley and be the Nomad investor.
It's true. It's true.
Okay.
I'd wear one.
Cool. All right, so moving on to this stuff. So anyway. Legacy Nomad. We talked about this idea. This is what I'm doing with my kids. My kids, they want to go out and buy a house as soon as they're done with college. I will gift them down payment money. They're going to get money out of my estate, get money into their hands. I'm going to teach them how to manage rental properties, and I'm going to gift them the money that they need for down payment. So they need 5% down, whatever it is, I'll gift them the money. This could be a source of down payment for some people. Even if you're not the one gifting it, you could go into your parents and, you come in, you get locked into the Nomad thing. You go to all the classes, you start working toward, getting an extra job and raising your down payment and all the things that you're supposed to do. And then you go to your parents at Christmas, or you go to your grandparents at Christmas, you tell them, hey, listen, I'm doing this Nomad thing. I've been going to classes for 6 months, and I got a second job, and I've saved up $2,000 already toward my $15,000 down payment. And you explain to them what you're doing, and it's not wishy-washy. It's not the flavor of the week. You show that you have persistence, and you're working toward this thing, and you're really going at it and doing it hard. And I think, just like I would if my kids were to show me that they're consistently working towards something, I think you get behind someone who has a dream and who's motivated to do something. And I think you'll see that some of your parents, some of your grandparents, some of your family's members would be willing to gift you, and in some cases your kids, by the way. If you've got grown kids, some of your kids, because they realize, hey, listen, I may need to support my parents. Maybe I should give them a little bit of money now in order to acquire these rental properties so that I don't have to support them later on. Might work. But you can go ahead and you share that vision, and they get behind you and they say, I'll help you with that. I'll gift you. What's the gift limit? $14K a year, something like that?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
So, maybe they say, I'll gift you $14,000 this year to kind of help you with the first property. They kind of watch you really closely, see how you do with the first one. Then maybe next year they're like, okay, I see what you did. You kind of converted this to a rental. That's a good job. I'll gift you another $14K. And so it kind of starts that way. So here's the quote I'd like to read to you. So it's by William Hutchison Murray. Until one is committed, there's hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, that ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from that decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance, which no man could have dreamed would have come his way. Whatever you can do or dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. And so the idea is that if you go and you commit to doing whatever plan you're doing, and in my case, I think Nomad, but whatever you decide, if you say, I'm going to attend these classes, they're all free, by the way. I want to attend these classes. I want to kind of go start looking for houses. I'm going to go get a job. I'm going to save money. I'm going to sell stuff off that I don't need to kind of build up my down payment. But if you start moving toward that goal, you will see things. Opportunities will come up. Your friends and family, they will see and kind of support you in this, and they will help you in achieving that. And it may not be directly money. Maybe that they find you a better job. Maybe that they help you sell stuff, maybe that they offer to buy things from you, whatever it is. Realize though that this taking action will build momentum, build strength, and help you achieve your goals. But you can't just show up for one class and say, I'm going to do Nomad, and the next week you're talking about something else, fix and flips or day trading or whatever it is. No, it's that persistent action, moving through things and committing and being decisive about it, okay? And I will tell you, just from a psychology perspective, it's better for you to contribute part of the down payment and ask for help making up the difference than to go to grandma or grandpa or mom or dad and saying, hey, can I have $15,000 for a down payment? It is much better for you to say, I've saved up $3,200. Could you help with the difference?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, plus there's a maybe I listened to too much Tony Robbins yesterday, but there's a sense of personal accomplishment and like involvement or I don't know the right word, but just being committed to that process, like you were saying, but having skin in the game. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yep, I agree. So the final bullet point I have in here is demonstrate the part-time job, demonstrate the education that you've gone and studied and researched this, and do the research, put in the effort in order to make momentum on this, okay? So next kind of item on the list for coming up with down payment, sell stuff. Garage, yard sales, Craigslist. Get rid of the stuff you don't need. It has two advantages in this case with Nomad. Number one is all the stuff that you have that's just been kind of accumulating and cluttering your house, you got to move that crap if you're going to be doing a Nomad model anyway. So the less stuff you have to move, the better off you are. Convert it to cash, okay? And, you're a big guy, Jason, on essentialism, right? And kind of like the minimal lifestyle and not doing stuff. And so there's other psychological and just lifestyle benefits of doing this stuff too, right?
Correct. You just and again, I don't want to be, I don't want to make it sound preachy or anything like that, but there's a burden, like a mental overhead kind of thing that comes from stuff.
Yeah. You don't own the stuff owns you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I totally agree. So sell your stuff in order to raise money for a down payment. And I'm sure for some of you, you have an entire down payment and stuff in your house.
Mm-hmm.
That if you actually put some effort into, you could totally do it. Yeah, less to move and property shows better too, Vita says. Yep, absolutely. All right, so Jason, this is going to be one of the times you tell your story, but let me kind of go through the slide first, and then I'd like you to kind of take over and talk about some stuff related to this.
Okay.
So working part-time on your fortune. There's a great story. Jim Rohn, who is the kind of the father figure in many ways to Tony Robbins, kind of where Tony Robbins came from, if you guys follow the kind of genealogy of the personal development industry. But Jim Rohn tells this great story about when he started doing his business. I think it was a network marketing business, but it doesn't matter. It's not relevant to this.
I was actually just reading the story yesterday. Yeah, it was a MLM company.
Yeah, and so basically he has this great story where he talks about, I had my job and I had my part-time business on the side, and I was working part-time to build my fortune. I was working part-time on my fortune, and I was doing the job. And eventually he got to the point where he could say, I earn as much part-time on this part-time business as I do at my full-time job, building my fortune. And eventually got to the point where he's like, part-time I'm able to make twice as much as I make at my job building my fortune. Well, when I read that and I watched the video, because he has like a little video of it on YouTube, which you can go look at. When I kind of went through that, I'm thinking to myself, that's the perfect analogy for Nomad, right? Because you're going and you're working your job. And at first you're working part-time, you're coming to class, you're kind of watching the webinars or going to Thursday meetings, and you're looking at houses, and you buy your first property and you move in and you're preparing to do your first tenant, and then you're getting your first tenant. You're working part-time on building your own little business in order to build your fortune. And eventually you're going to get to the point where the money you're making from your Nomad business, when you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 properties, whatever it is, will eventually surpass the amount of money you're making from your job. And so you'll have the same story, but it goes further than that. And so this idea of get a part-time job to build your fortune. So let's say, Jason, you happen to live in a place where in your kind of financial world, you're making just enough money to get by. The amount of money you've got coming in covers all of your living expenses, and for some reason you're unwilling, which you'll talk about in a minute, you're unwilling to give up your current lifestyle. You know, you want your cell phone, you want to go to the movies, you want to go dining out 2 times a week or whatever it is that you have there. Would you be willing to get an extra job to build your fortune? Okay, so you're going to go ahead and decide, I'm going to work 15 hours a week. I'm going to go pick up a couple shifts delivering pizza on Thursday and Friday night or whatever it is, and I'm going to work 2 shifts a week for 50 weeks a year to earn $15,000 to get your down payment to do a house. Now, you can do this one of 2 ways. If you want to do this in 1 year, you need to find a job that pays you $20 an hour, which pizza delivery probably will get very close to that. Okay? Or if you're willing to spread it out over 2 years, you could go find a $10 per hour job. $10 per hour, which is easy to find, guys. I mean, Qdoba pays $10 an hour in our local market, in case you didn't know. So $10 an hour, 15 hours a week, part-time to build your fortune, because $10 an hour, 15 hours a week is $150 a week times 50 weeks a year, gives you, over 2 years, $15,000. $15,000 is the amount you need in order to do your down payment. So would you be willing to go get a part-time job to be able to come up with a down payment to get your first rental property and keep working that job in order to come up with down payments until you don't need to do it anymore and it's self-fulfilling? Would you be willing to do that, to build your fortune?
Now that I understand the principle, yes.
Yeah. But, you know, if you just think yourself, I'm going to go deliver pizza, it's kind of beneath me. No, I'm delivering pizzas. I'm on a mission. I'm going to go ahead and build up this money in order to do down payment. And now I know, because I'm willing to do this extra work now, I'm going to have a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio in the future. And I got a plan to do it. I'm working at it. I know exactly what I need to do. Okay? Or you could do 1% down. We're going to talk about this here in a second. $3,000 for your first home. If you work 15 hours a week at $10 an hour, you'd only need to work 20 weeks to jumpstart your fortune. And I will show you here in a moment how to take that $3,000 and use it to parlay into a multiple of rental properties, however many you want, honestly, because we're going to use lease option fees in order to pay for subsequent down payments. Okay. So once you have the first test, you can use the house to fund future down payments or continue to work part-time to build your fortune. So would you be willing to work 10 to 15 hours a week on your fortune if you knew your part-time business would make more than your job income within a few years? I think so. I think most people would. All right.
If you lay it out, it becomes a no-brainer.
Yeah. I'm going to go to this slide, and I want you to tell your story, because your story is directly related to this. So every other year, Nomad. So the end result for Nomad, if you kind of look at the numbers, it's $9 million in real estate equity and $478,000 per year net positive cash flow. Would you be willing to do that from working a part-time job at $10 per hour, 15 hours a week? If I told you, Jason, if you go do this, you go work at a $10 per hour job, 15 hours a week, and you were willing to do that for a period of time in order to get $9 million in real estate equity and almost $500,000 a year in net positive cash flow after all expenses, would you be willing to do that extra job?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's really what the every other year Nomad is. So instead of doing the once a year thing, if you're just willing to do that, you can actually buy a house every other year, and you can get to the $9 million in equity and $500,000 a year in cash flow. This is the plain vanilla model, not using lease options. Is what we teach, the basic thing. And so that's really every 2 years that you do that. You'll still need to work at your regular job to qualify for loans and pay your living expenses. The part-time job is money to invest in your fortune. That's the down payment. So that's the model. All right, so tell me what you wrote this article about, because I'm pretty interested in it.
So basically what happened was, and again, it started from a place of being kind of a political rant. There was an episode of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart at the very end of 2014 where the $15 an hour living wage argument, all the protests were going on, all that stuff, and Senator Rubio came onto the show. He was the guest on the show, and he said, let me pull up the exact quote here. He said, "It's impossible to get ahead on $10.10 an hour," which at the time is what President Obama had made the new federal employee minimum wage via an executive order. Okay. And I won't repeat my exact response to that because it was unprintable. But it really upset me. Okay. I've spent some extended periods of time living in my car, working $9, $10 an hour jobs. Okay. Yep. And to say that you can't get ahead when you're making minimum wage is total malarkey.
Okay.
So I wrote a post on my personal blog running through the actual math. And the numbers even surprised me at the time when I actually sat down and ran through them. So how much detail do you want me to go into on this?
Do like a 5-minute version, because we do have a lot of detail to cover left.
Okay. So basically, the cornerstone of the rant is the majority of the things that Americans spend money on are completely optional. Okay, we have one of the highest standards of living on the entire planet.
They're luxuries, to be clear.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And when people say that, oh, you can't live on X dollars a year, and the number usually thrown around is the poverty level. So, $18,000 a year. Oh, nobody can live off that. Oh, $10,000 a year. Nobody can live off that. Yep. Well, that's crap, because guess what? Hundreds of thousands of college students do it every single year.
Yep.
Okay, that are self-supported, by the way.
Yep.
So I ran the numbers kind of from that perspective. And for those of you that are in Colorado, I actually used Colorado numbers. I used numbers from Front Range Community College to show how somebody could make $10 an hour and go to college at Front Range Community College to prepare themselves for a higher paying job and thus, quote, get ahead in life. Right? Yep. So the way that the math worked out is at $10.10 an hour, 40 hours a week, that is $21,000 a year pre-tax, $1,700 a month. Okay, yep. So there's the effective tax rate at the time. So there's about $1,200 that comes off for taxes. There's Social Security, Medicare that comes out. That's another $1,600 a year. So that's an effective tax rate of 15%, all in. Okay. Yep. Let's see. So she's down to I kind of did an avatar person for this. That leaves this person about $18,000 a year to actually live on.
Yep.
Well, I went on Craigslist and I looked at some of the neighborhoods around Denver. Where can you find a room for rent? All right. Yep. You can find a decent room for rent in somebody's house for $350, $400, $500, $600 a month. Okay. Plenty of them out there. All right. For my example,
let me pause you for a second. I want to comment on this. There's
sure.
A couple of military guys on the call.
Yeah.
So when we were in the military.
Oh yeah.
Do you have your own bedroom? And did you have your own bedroom?
I had a rack.
Yeah. And I didn't personally have to do it, but I've heard of people having a hot rack where you are literally sharing your bed with another person. Yep. When you are sleeping, they're on shift, and then when you get off shift, they actually get in your bed and sleep there.
The bed's always warm.
Yeah, right. I mean, so to think that someone is living at this level of I need to have this whole house, 7 rooms I never go into, and a kitchen and everything else, and that's the standard of living. I think that's just an unrealistic expectation for a lot of people.
Yeah, what? I have
myself. I mean, I've got rooms in my house I never go into.
I was just going to say that I have a room in my house. The door is closed to keep the dog out of there. I have not been into that room since the day I closed on the house.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to rent it out. But okay, so that's an option. So for my example, I picked an example room, an actual house off Craigslist, $450 a month. So that's a living cost of $5,400 a year. And I know a lot of people haven't traveled the world extensively like I have, but renting a room in an average American home, okay, is a pretty good quality of living by global standards.
Sure.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. So, then so that's $5,400 a year out. All right. Well, what about a car? If you live in a city, which most Americans do, you have access to a public transit system.
Yep.
An RTD bus pass was $870 a year at the time I wrote this blog post. And yeah, I realize people are going to gripe, what? You want to take the bus? Are you kidding me? Yeah, get over it. Deal with it.
Yeah. Do the abridged version. Speed up.
Okay. So then, looking at food, it's, you don't need to spend $500 a month on food. You can get that down pretty low, blah, blah, blah. So the bottom line, if you minimize living expenses, you have a prepaid cell phone, flip phone plan instead of the latest iPhone, and $100 a month cell phone plan. You're buying clothes at thrift stores, right? You're living frugally, but you're still living comfortably, right? Yeah. You're not living in a cardboard box, okay? So at the end of the day, this person making $21,000 a year is still able to afford full-time tuition, books, and fees at the local community college, and still has enough money and time in the weekends to still hang out with friends a little bit, buy the occasional beer or whatever. Yeah. But as long as they don't go crazy, but they can live quite comfortably, actually.
Yeah.
And then at the end of like a 1 or 2 year certificate program at Front Range, okay, there is a huge shortage in this country of skilled trade labor, for example, just as an example, welders, electricians, electronics people, skills we got in the Navy, right? Nurses, LPNs, computer techs, whatever. All these things that you can get into in a 1 year or less certificate program. And guess what? Those jobs pay $15 to $20 an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. So you live like a college student for 1 freaking year, and you suck it up, and you work your 40 hours a week, and you go to school in the evenings, right?
Yep.
So yeah, you have extra commute time. Yes, you have, 15 hours a week of classes. Yeah, you're going to be tired, but you know what? You're still getting your 8 hours of sleep a day. You're still getting 3 squares. You still sleep in a comfortable bed with a roof over your house.
Yeah.
Okay, all for less than $21,000 a year, which is $10 an hour, and you come out of it with a skill set from those night school classes where now your earning capacity is 1.5 to 2 times what you had before, and there's plenty of those jobs available.
Totally. All right.
Now, I want to one more thing.
Okay.
So if you now, I realize that there might be a difficulty in qualifying for a mortgage with a $10 an hour job. Okay. Sure. But if you get an affordable enough property, and you get some down payment assistance, and you use, for example, FHA or USDA 100% financing for low income people, if you're in a USDA area, right? Then that $10 an hour job, you can, if you're not going to college, it's $5,000-$6,000 that I calculated here of that 21,000 in income is going to college tuition.
So you could basically set that aside for your down payment.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I know that can be done. So
yeah,
to summarize it, because we do need to move on because I've got a pretty hefty slide coming up here. You definitely can do this whole thing on $10 an hour.
Correct.
In fact, I'm probably going to write a book on it. I'm going to write the book on how to do the entire Nomad model on a $10 an hour job. I think I'm going to call it.
I love it. Let me know if you want some help with that.
I do want some help with it. And I jokingly was going to write it to my son when he wasn't sure if he was going to go to school, but it was going to be skip college, work at Qdoba, and acquire a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I hope it's obvious that I'm passionate about this particular topic.
I think it's great because I think there's a lot of people that don't realize there are options available for them.
Correct.
All right, so moving on. Let's talk about this. Fixer Upper Nomad is one of the final ones on here. Fixer Upper Nomad might be hard if you don't have the money to do the fix up. So that's the harder to do. But the idea is you buy a property, move in, live there, fix it up, and then you resell it and get the money out of it that you put into kind of like doing forced equity building. It is like starting a fixer-upper business, so it's not for everybody. It is definitely work. You got to do sweat equity. A lot of times you're doing the work yourself. You can finance the repairs in some cases using credit cards or things like that. Do a traditional sale, which I don't recommend you do because it costs there's some additional fees into it. Or do lease option exit, but the lease option exit usually takes longer. The fees, you can kind of do it up front and get the money very quickly to do that. By the way, Vita, I did see a lot of stuff on there. Vita basically says that she works with a lot of immigrants, and they are able to get ahead on minimum wage because they know how to manage money, live below their means, and buy real estate and increase their net worth. They live the American dream, and they make it happen. And I totally agree with you, is that I think people they get out of high school or college and they want to live at least the lifestyle that their parents did or better. And I think that's a mistake. I think that's something that people should realize, that if you live a little bit below your means, then you will be able to save more money and do better for yourself. So, all right, so Fixer Upper Nomad, traditional sale lease option, use profits as additional down payments. There's a class coming up on Fixer Upper Nomad on August 8th, or you can go watch the video from last year when I did it, and Fixer Upper Nomad overview on the website. Okay, this is the magical slide coming up, okay? So this is the presentation where I came up with this idea of how to acquire the multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio, starting with less than $3,000. You can go watch the video from last year when I did a whole class on this at learntoberich.com/nomad just 3,000. Or it's also outlined in the book online, learntoberich.com/book, okay? So those are the resources for if you want additional information on what I'm going to do. But what I'm going to do now is go over the assumptions for the model, and then I'm going to walk you through kind of what the math is for the assumptions. And so let's go over the assumptions first. All right, Jason, play along with me. In this particular model, you're going to go buy your first property using the 1% down conventional loan program. If you want to know more information about that, we covered it in detail in the Financing 101 class. So go watch that video. Don't have time to reteach it tonight. Each additional property that you buy that you're going to move into, you're going to be able to get with the 5% down conventional financing. Now, there is a 3% down conventional program you can go get for the next 2 and 3. I didn't model it using that. I wanted to be more conservative. So we did 1% down on the first one and 5% down on each additional one that we did, okay? I'm also going to round up the down payment. So if the down payment we needed was, $2,800, I rounded it up to $3,000. And if we have negative cash flow, that also got rounded up. So the total amount you needed, including negative cash flow in order to cover the property, was $3,500. I rounded up to $4,000. Okay, so always rounded up. Even if it was $4,200, rounded up to $5,000. Okay, always rounded up to the nearest $1,000. I have disregarded depreciation, which in a lot of cases would have completely eliminated negative cash flow. So in this case, I've said I'm not going to take into account depreciation because I did all the math. Originally, I did this all by hand, and I've since written software that actually does all the calculations, which is how we write all the books. Okay, so I've disregarded depreciation, which could also contribute to your down payments, but we've ignored it for this model. Does that make sense?
Sorry, yeah.
All right. I'm assuming a tenant buyer that you're actually going to take, when you buy the property, you move in. After you live there for a year, we're going to find a tenant buyer who is willing to come in and offer to rent the property from you for a year or 2 or 3 or 4. And at the end of year 4, they are going to buy the property from you. When they buy the property from you, I'm assuming the amount of money you make from what you owe on the property to the amount that they purchase is going to be $45,000 net profit. I also assume that that number does not increase when in fact it does go up, okay? So you're making $45,000 on the first deal 5 years in, and you're going to make $45,000 on the 11th deal, which is many, many years out, which actually goes up in the real world, okay? So I've just assumed that it's $45K net, okay? I'm also assuming that you wait for your tenant buyer with 5% down when exiting your Nomad home. So here's how it works. Jason, you buy a property. You put 1% down. You live there for a year. Getting close to the end of the year, you say, I will not move out of this property and buy my next property until I can find a tenant buyer that has a full 5% down as an option fee. Until I find that person, I'm not moving out of this property. So I'm waiting until I find a 5% down tenant buyer. Now, are there 5% down tenant buyers out there, Jason?
Yes.
Yeah. Are they like super, super common where you're going to get 30 phone calls on day 1?
No.
No. But are there people with more than 5% down?
Yes.
Yeah. I think a 5% down person is very similar to a FHA, first-time homebuyer person, because FHA is 3.5 and 5% is not that much more. And so you wait until you find a 5% down tenant buyer who's got that down. That's you have to wait until you find them. That's a critical part of this plan, okay? Because you're going to use that 5% in order to purchase your next property. I'm assuming the tenant buyer. Oh, when you have enough money, you're able to go buy additional 20% down properties. So if you find you've saved up enough to do 20% down, I'll show you how the math works. Then we're going to go buy additional 20% down properties so that we can buy more than one a year. One we move into at 5% down, and ones where we have profit from our tenant buyers, we're going to use those and actually apply them as down payments. Okay. And I'm going to assume on the ones that you bought with 20% down, they're only going to have 3% for the option fee. It's not going to be the full 5%. So it's a little bit more conservative. And again, I round up to the nearest thousand. Okay. I also assume that the tenant buyer properties where you put 20% down have break-even cash flow. In fact, they usually have positive cash flow. Okay. So this is another conservative, make it a little bit easier type of model. But usually you'll have positive cash flow on those. In this case, I've said it's break-even. And then it's based on, if you want to kind of see where I got these numbers from, I'll go into a ton of detail. It's the same exact numbers I used in the presentation for Catch-Up Nomad, where I walk through every single number and why I use the same assumptions. So if you want to hear more details about that, it's the exact same modeling assumptions as the $286,000 property in Catch-Up Nomad. So you can go watch that. Okay. Now that we've got all the assumptions, let's walk through what's going on here. For those of you that aren't looking at the screen, you may want to because there's going to be a lot of detail coming at you, and I want you to follow along, and I'll use my mouse. Jason, can you see my mouse move?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So here's the key on top. The little orange houses, these kind of like peach-colored, orangish ones, those are properties that we are moving into that we bought with 5% down, except for year one. In year one, we put 1% down, but each one of these additional ones is going to be a 5% down payment house. Okay, so that's what the orange house means. Any greenhouses mean that at one point we lived in them. They were a prior Nomad property, but they're now a rental property. Okay, so all the green ones here are going to be properties that were Nomad at one point. Now they're rentals. The red houses are the ones that we sold off in order to be able to have money in our bank account to buy 20% down properties in the future. Okay, those are the red ones, are the ones that we sold that year. The yellow ones are new 20% down purchase properties. So those are the ones that in that year we put 20% down and we acquired that property. Blue ones are ones that we had bought the year before and now they have a tenant buyer in there. They're a rental property with 20% down. Those are the ones that are blue. OO means it's owner occupant. So OO means this property is owner occupant. We're living in it. TB means that these are the properties that have tenant buyers in them. Y means that's the amount of money we invested that year. So Y, negative $3,000. And T equals the total amount invested. Okay? So let me tell you a story, and I want you to follow along on the chart. Okay? Year one, we actually put 1% down in order to buy this $286,000 property. So we ended up putting about $3,000 down. Remember, I rounded up. So we have 1% down, $3,000 down property. In the first year, we invested $3,000, and the total amount we invested is $3,000. Jason, do you follow along at this point?
So far.
It's going to get really complicated, so I want to make sure we go slow at the beginning, and then I'll build up, okay? So easy day, we own one property, we put $3,000 down, we own it. Total amount invested that year was $3,000. Total amount invested total is $3,000, okay? In year two, we wait until we have a tenant buyer with 5% option fee. And when we have them, we agree to lease option the property to them. They're going to lease it and they have the option to buy it from us sometime in the future. And we're going to use that 5% that they give us as their option fee as the down payment in order to purchase our next property. So year two, we buy another property. This one went up in value a little bit, $286,000 plus 3%, whatever that is. And the cost for it was $16,000 is what we needed, including any negative cash flow from the property. So we need $16,000. We got that $16,000 from the tenant buyer. So the tenant buyer that moved in gave us the $16K. We used that to buy the property. We now own a property that we live in and one that has a tenant buyer in it and is starting to pay us rent. Okay. So in that year, we collected $16 from the tenant buyer. We paid out $16 for the down payment. It's a wash. We have $0 invested that year. Does that make sense? Jason? Did I lose you?
Sorry.
You're coughing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
You're the thing. So basically, you have nothing in the deal. So the total amount year to date, total amount of the overall plan over all years, we're negative $3,000 down. So that's the down payment we had for the first year. Okay. But now we have two properties, one that we're living in and one that we have a tenant buyer. Moving on to year 3. We wait until we have another 5% option fee from the next tenant buyer. We use that $17,000 in order to buy our next owner-occupant property. 5% down to do the property. So we're living in that property. We have 2 properties, each with a tenant buyer in there. The tenant buyer had given us $17K. We use that to buy the property. The total amount we invested that year is 0. And the total amount we have invested overall to date is negative $3,000. We have $3,000 invested. So we own 3 properties. One we're living in, and we have 2 tenant buyers. Everyone follow? If anyone gets confused, go ahead and use the chat window and let me know. I'll clarify. Okay? Year 4, we get a tenant buyer to give us $18,000. We buy another property. This is the 18 they gave us. We now have 3 tenant buyers in the properties from the 3 previous properties we lived in, and we have 0 invested that year, negative $3,000 total invested. Okay? Now something magical happens in year 5. Okay? We have a tenant buyer from the previous property we lived in. They give us $18,000 down. We use that in order to buy our next property. So we have another property we're living in as a Nomad. We have 3 properties with tenant buyers, but the first one, this guy right here, he actually went and sold. He actually bought the property from us. So we sold the property that year. So remember when I told you our assumptions is we said we have $45,000 profit each time one of these sells, and that they're buying it every 4 years. So he lived in there for 4 years, and then at the end of that time, he ended up selling he ended up buying the property. We ended up selling the property, and we netted $45,000 total. So why do I only have $29,000 here? Jason, do you know?
No. Well, you subtracted out.
Yep.
No. Yeah, you subtracted something out.
Yeah, so we basically got $16,000 of the 45 up front. That's what we used as a down payment for our first property. So we made $45,000 profit total. We got $16,000 of it in year 1 when they actually put the option fee. That applies toward their purchase. So that gets applied to their purchase. We already collected it. We use it as a down payment. Now we're getting the rest. We're getting the $29,000 remaining on the property right here. So we got $29K. So we got the 18 that we used to buy the property from the new tenant buyer, and then we got $29K from this red property selling. So the total amount this year is actually we made $29,000 total. You had $29,000 total to the negative $3,000 you had invested so far, and you have a total amount that you've invested so far of $26K. You follow along?
Mostly.
What's that?
Mostly.
Really? Are you not following?
No, this is where it really starts to get complicated, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and so if anyone's confused, let me know and I'll explain it. But I want to just keep going. So if you're confused, go ahead and say, hey, I've got questions, and we'll go ahead and make sure everyone gets their questions answered. But here's the thing. So the next property, we wait for another tenant buyer. They give us $19,000. That's right here coming in. This is the $19,000 for the down payment. So those wash. We buy another house. We have 3 with tenant buyers. The one from this year sells, so that property sells, and we have enough now. We have a 20% down payment so that we can buy another property with 20% down. So this $19,000 was the down payment from the lease option, was the option fee from the tenant buyer. Whoops, where'd my mouse go? This $28,000 is the red one selling, and again, we're offsetting the amount they had from the option fee. Yep, exactly. And then we had $10K here from. We bought a new property with 20% down, and the tenant buyer for that one gave us 3% down. So the $10,000 is the 3% option fee on the new 20% down property we bought. Okay? That's this 10. And then this $66,000 is the 20% down payment we needed in order to buy this yellow one. So the yellow one we bought with $66K down, but we instantly got a $10,000 rebate from that option, from that tenant buyer buying it, but doing a lease option with us for 3% down. Okay, so the total amount we were out for the year was $28K, and the total we're out combined is negative $2K. Okay, all right. Next year, Basically, buy another one with $19,000 from the option fee. Use that in order to buy another property to move into as Nomad. We have 3 tenant buyers in previous Nomad properties. We're going to sell one of the Nomad properties again. We got $27,000 from that, which is $45,000, and the 18 that we kind of had from the option fee earlier. What year was I? Here it was. And we sold one. That's the 27. And then we had the blue one from the previous year. So the yellow one became the blue one. The blue one means that we have a 20% down rental property with a tenant buyer in there. And I originally, when I did this slide originally, I had a math error. So I had actually put in 10K when it really wasn't in there. So I made up this story to explain where this extra 10 came from magically. Okay, Jason, do all tenant buyers buy properties?
Actually, I would say most do not close.
Right, most do not close. So do you think it's possible in our story here, one of the tenant buyers actually lived in the properties for 2 years and said, wait a minute, I changed my mind, I don't want to buy, I'm moving out?
It happens all the time.
Okay, and so maybe one of them, you had this happen where they moved out, and we now got a new tenant buyer to come in and say, I will give you $10,000, I will now do a lease option on this property. Is that possible?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's where this magical 10K comes from then. Okay, so I originally had a math error, but rather than redo all the calculations down here, I'm changing the story to tell you that in this particular case, there was a magical $10,000 that appeared, and the story is now one of the tenant buyers decided not to buy. We got a replacement tenant buyer, and the replacement tenant buyer says, here's 10K as an option fee. Okay? So really this year, you had 19 come in, you used that to buy the property, 27 from the sale, and 10K from the extra option fee, so a total of net 37 in. Your total amount invested is actually 35 in the bank. All right, year 8, you buy another property, costs 20K down, you got the 20K down from the option fee, 27 is the sale of this red property, $11,000 is the 3% down from the new yellow one that you purchased, $70,000 is what you had from the, basically your 20% down in order to purchase the yellow one. Negative 32 for the year is what you had to put in. And so the total amount you have outstanding invested is 3K. And Vita says, is your tenant buyer unable to qualify with outside lender usually? Nope. So Vita, great question. Before we're willing to put a tenant buyer in the property, we want them to talk to a lender, and we want the lender to tell us that yes, provided they do X, Y, and Z, they will be able to qualify a year or 2 or 3 or 4 in the future. We never want to put a tenant buyer in a property that is not going to be able to exercise their option, because we want to set people up to win. We do not want to set people up to fail. And so if they're unable, if the lender says, hey, listen, this person's never getting a loan, end of story, we usually go to them and say, hey, listen, the lender says you're not going to be able to get a loan. I don't want to go and take your $18,000 option fee only to find out 2 years from now that I just took your money and you're never going to be able to close on the property. I want to be fair with you. Doesn't sound like you're going to be able to get the loan, so let's go ahead and not do the lease option. We want to be fair to them. Okay?
You know what? That's actually a revelation to me. That actually, sorry, mentally, that's huge. I never clicked that part.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to set people up to win. We never want to put someone in a situation where we're taking advantage of anybody.
But just from a procedural, systems aspect, that's huge. That's huge. It's just huge.
We haven't talked to the lender first. Yep. Okay, so here we're getting some magical stuff here. So in year 8, we did this. We basically have $3,000 total in our bank account, kind of outstanding, plus a ton of equity. So in year 9, something magical happens. We get another 20K, the 5% down from the lease option tenant buyer. We buy another property where we move into. We now have 3 previous properties we lived in that now have tenant buyers in there. We sell 2 properties. We have 1 blue property that is 20% down, and we're able to buy 2 20% down properties. Okay, so this is the amount of money we got a profit from the red one. We had another blue property that we ended up selling, and that's the 100K. So when the blue properties sell, you get the profit back plus the down payment back. So you get $45,000 profit, plus you have $60-something thousand or so that you had from the down payment on the property. So you get $100,000 back in your bank account. Plus we have 2 new properties that we have tenant buyers in. Those are the 11K each. and then the $72,000 down in order to purchase these 2 new properties. So the total amount invested that year net after everything is $4K, and the total amount total invested is $7K. But now how many properties do we own? 1, 2, 3, 4. These don't count because they sold them. 5, 6, 7. So by year 9, we own 7 properties. Jason, how much did we invest in this deal in order to get 7 properties?
Let's see. What are we at? $3,000.
Yep, $3,000. Okay.
Still the original 3,000.
The original 3,000. We've used all the internal money from the property in order to fund these, and the assumptions are really conservative. Okay. So moving on here, basically you buy another property. You've got 3 tenant buyer ones. You sell one. Now you have 3 20% down rentals that you have for that year, for year 10. Buy another one. You move in. You have 3 tenant buyer properties. You sell 2 properties that year. One of them is a 20% down. One of them is a 5% down tenant buyer property. You have 2 20% down rental properties from before, and you buy 2 more new ones. That's the math on that, okay? In year 12, you buy another owner occupant. You have 3 tenant buyer ones. You sell 3, you buy 3, and you have 2 other 20% downs. And that's the math on that one. You eventually have some money in your account. Another year goes by, another tenant buyer. You have 3 properties. Sell 1. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other ones with 20% down. You buy 1 more 20% down property. And then finally, in year 14, when I stop doing the model, and you can continue on after this, you have another owner-occupant one, 3 tenant buyer ones, 3 that you sold, 4 20% down ones that you've already owned, and 3 new 20% down properties. And so there's kind of where you end up. And at the end, in year 14, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 properties that you own. So you're able to get to 11 properties, and you can see how you'll eventually get to the point where you'll have as many properties as you want to buy that you can get qualified for loans for. Okay? And the model doesn't stop. In fact, the book goes and builds you up to about 20. And the book kind of takes over from this model and does a lot more detailed math. This is really rough math where we're being conservative with the numbers you're getting. But the book actually uses real numbers and assumes, okay, property went up 3% and so on. Vita says, how hard has it been to find tenant buyers with the down payment you require? Easy. Easy meaning you can do it. You need to actually do some marketing for it and wait until you find one. But it is not something that is going to take forever. It is not something that is impossible to find. And Vita, think about this. You're a real estate agent. How many first-time home buyers or buyers with challenged credit have you found that have 5% down? Because that's the market, right? It's people that for some reason, they can't get a loan, but they have 5%. If they don't have 5%, they do not qualify for your program. I mean, that's the way to look at it. Okay? Does anyone have any questions on this? Because this is the end of the presentation, but I'll leave this slide up so that I can answer any questions on it. But those are the different ways to kind of come up with down payment for doing Nomad. And this slide in particular is a way to do it with $3,000 down. Now, Jason, we already know this, right? VA loans, USDA loans, those are 2 ways you can do this with nothing down.
Correct.
So instead of doing the 1% down loan program to start with, you could go and do this with your first property being a USDA or VA loan and do this entire model with absolutely nothing down.
Absolutely. And you can also do it FHA if you meet low income qualifications and are in an area that still has an active and funded down payment assistance program.
Sure, you do grants and stuff like that in order to get
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So a combination of those, you can really make this whole thing work. But that is the whole model. And so we do a whole 2-hour class on this. It's basically called How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Real Estate Portfolio with $3,000 down. We have a whole class on that. We also have the book, which is the written out longhand version of this particular whole model. And then there's also one other class that does this. What was it? Did I have it in here?
Maybe we've got the entire class on it.
Yeah, there's an entire 2-hour class on it. Yeah.
And
Liz says, where do you list these lease option properties? Can't say I've seen these advertised before. They're usually either in the homes for sale section or they're in the for rent section on Craigslist.
Yeah. Craigslist is your friend.
Yeah, we have a whole class on marketing to tenant buyers in order to model this. And the lease option class goes into a lot of detail about how to find the tenant buyers. Yeah. So, yep, there's a whole bunch of information on how to do this. And, you know, the book is really a great place to start because I think it goes into a lot of that detail But then the 2-hour videos on each kind of section of the business model is really where you want to go. Any other questions? What do you think, Jason? Kind of like that chart?
I'm warming up to it.
Yeah, I like the infographic part of the chart. I like the way that it visually explains the model for 14 years. It took me a while to figure out a way to make it so that it was pictorial. And people,
it's still pretty complex, though.
I totally agree. And people ask me all the time, it seems like a lot of work. Yeah, it's a lot of work for $9 million and $500,000 a year in cash flow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's how you get there. You can get $9 million in equity and $500,000 a year in passive cash flow, starting with $3,000. And the other thing I hear a lot is, my wife doesn't want to move or my husband doesn't want to move. And so the thing that I usually suggest to people is I say, okay, great. You should sit down with your spouse and say, okay, this is how much money we have in savings now. This is how much I think we can save each month or each year, whatever it is. Let's go look at the math as to where we'll be when we're ready to retire if we don't do this model. And we're able to pick any number you want for the stock market, because I'm pretty sure that this number beats it all the time. And then you can go talk to your spouse and see what the plan is in order to get where you need to be. And say, so what do you want to do? Do you want to save, $5,000 a month in order to get to the numbers we need for retirement? Or would you like to move once a year? So. All right, cool. Any final questions before we end for the night? Jason doesn't have any questions?
Sorry, I do not.
Liz says, what is cash flow year over year? So there are separate charts, and when you do the catch-up Nomad one right here at the bottom of this page, if you go there, it shows you cash flow each year. For doing a very similar model. The book actually shows you the exact cash flow you get each year doing this very model. This particular one, we assume that cash flow is break even. But the actual model in the book goes into the exact amount of cash flow on each property and shows you a chart. Yeah, for those of you who have not checked out that learntoberich.com/book, that's pretty good stuff. It's some of the best stuff I've got, honestly.
And you don't have to be a premium member to access that, do you?
You do not. It's all open to the public.
Exactly.
Yep. So just go ahead and go on there and read it. I gave out physical copies for Christmas gifts to people that were local, but the book is actually, and by the way, the physical one has an error in it. The one online is actually correct. Vita says, this would allow you to save money from regular earnings for emergencies. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, totally should. You should save. I'm a big believer in keeping huge cash reserves. So we talk about how to do this on a shoestring, but if you have money, I think you should save money. I think you should have it saved up and have big chunks of money in savings. And that's one of the things I tell Jason all the time, right? So I'd rather see you put a smaller amount down instead of doing 20% down on the next property. So I'd rather see you keep that money in cash.
Yeah, you've made a very compelling argument recently for not purchasing a 20% down property this year, even though I will probably have the capital to do so, but rather keeping that money, because it's not an insignificant amount of cash. It'd be about $60,000 to make that down payment, and keeping that in the bank as a cushion, and just sticking with the Nomad model, because as you've clearly demonstrated, if you just stick with the model, the math works.
Yeah. You don't have to, there's a lot of people, you go to like a real estate club or you read about a model in a book, you're like, okay, I can improve on that, right? You don't need to improve my model. My model is amazing. Just work the existing model that's in place. Don't try to tweak it and make it better for yourself.
And I will point out, James is one of the most humble people you will ever meet, and he still just said that, okay?
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I'm the most humble person you'll meet, but I appreciate you saying that. So
let's put it this way, okay? To kind of bring this full circle from 2 hours ago.
Okay.
If you do the program, it will take care of itself just in the exact same way that your your fission fragments are going to decay, after reactor shutdown, right? In a very predictable manner. Very predictable manner.
That's awesome. All right, guys. If there's no other questions, I'm gonna go grab myself dinner because I did not eat dinner yet tonight. Vita says something else here. So regular earnings. If you would not want Domino's to fall or cookie to crumble, yeah, make sure you have cash reserves. Backup cash allows you to sleep well at night too. I totally agree. Elijah, you are very welcome. It's my pleasure. And thanks to everyone that kind of joined us tonight and went for the class. You're welcome, Liz. Glad you were able to join us. So yeah, if you have any questions, let us know. But we'll try to get the recording up of this pretty soon. Jason, again, thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge and the article, especially tonight. That was super helpful.
You're welcome. Me on.
And thanks, Vita. Yeah, thanks, guys. Have a great night. I will see you all soon. Bye-bye for now.